Mr. Ali Jillani. He's a development practitioner focused on democratization of state and society in Pakistan, with over 10 years of advocacy at the national, regional, and global level. He has expertise in capacity building, advocacy, and research for governance reforms concerning access to justice, political, economical equality, human rights, social development, and environmental protection. He currently serves with the Karachi Research Chair, a policy think tank driven for evidence-based advocacy around sustainable development. Mr. Jillani, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator, and APRCEM for the opportunity. The decade of action and delivery for sustainable development can only be realized if systemic barriers like global inequalities of wealth, power, and resources, international economic trade and monetary frameworks, militarism and conflict, patriarchal authoritarianism, marginalizing governance, shrinking democratic spaces, as well as a guilt-free pass on means of implementation commitments are addressed. The unprecedented COVID-19 crisis has reinforced the need to address such vulnerabilities caused by neoliberal globalization and flawed macroeconomic governance. ODA is falling short of its commitment of 0.7% of GNI, evident of the fact that only 6 countries could meet their ODA targets in 2017, with the overall contribution amounting to $147.2 billion against the required investment of US $5 to $7 trillion to achieve the SDGs. On the flip side, wealth and resources continue to flow from developing countries through illicit financial flows, tax evasions, capital flows, asset stealth, trade mispricing, and profit shifting by multinational corporations, where the data shows that the developing economies lost over 7.8 trillion between 2004 and 2013. With the outflows increasing at 6.5% every year, twice as fast as the global GDP. The terms of discussion around official development assistance need to change from an act of benevolence to that of responsibility for global north, reckoning the historical debt owed to the developing world after centuries of colonial plunder and its continued patterns through imperial neoliberal tactics. People of the Asia-Pacific reject official development assistance used to catalyze private sector engagement, achieve trade, military, and political objectives of donor countries, and its substitution with climate financing, refugee costs, or debt cancellation as recently proposed by the Development Assistance Committee. ODA needs to be reformed, reviewed for impact, and held accountable for failure to deliver on the commitments rather than being reduced to buzzworded negotiation outcomes going 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Debt stress is another key challenge exacerbated by COVID-19, where increased debt financing along with economic downturn will lead to higher government debt to GDP ratio expected to rise to 49% in 2021 among the least developing countries, while the pandemic generally affecting a much larger group of 40 out of 43 countries in the Asia Pacific. Reiterating the Secretary General's appeal reckoning COVID-19 situation, we cannot resort to the usual tools in such unusual times, so we need strong multilateral commitments to address debt distress, having pushed poor countries into generational debt traps, leaving virtually no fiscal space for effective COVID recovery or sustainable development priorities. Trade as a critical MOI need to be democratized through structural reforms prioritizing people and the planet over profits, upholding the essence and multidimensionality of the Agenda 2030, safeguarding state policy space. Localization of SDGs shouldn't mean the absence of accountability mechanism at the global level to ensure the establishment of global reform entities for SDGs compatibility impact assessment of taxation architecture, trade and investment agreements, and synergizing multilateral cooperation to avoid corporatocratization of the globe. Rather than pushing the poorest countries for economic self-reliance, the processes should help them address macroeconomic pressures embodied in hegemonic trade agreements through conditions of market deregulation, massive privatizations, corporate capture of resources and governance, and neoliberal instruments like ISDS, among others. In terms of technology, the corporate control of data as the raw material for the fourth industrial revolution, and concentration of technological innovation in the hands of a few technology giants must not be allowed to compromise privacy, hinder technology transfer, impede the capacity of developing countries to develop their technological capacity, marginalize human workforce, or undermine local knowledge systems. Policy emphasis on digitization and technological advancement must ensure a civil society-led thorough review of the potential adverse effects on the environment, the social, cultural, economic, civic, and political rights of the people. Our decade of action demands the dismantling of neoliberal development framework that destroys the environment, starves people of resources, and strips them of rights, and criminalizes those who stand for justice. The people of the Asia Pacific demand development justice. If the Agenda 2030 is to be endorsed as the global social contract between people and governments of the world, it's high time they walk the talk. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jillani, for those very cogent comments. I'm sure that the participants have taken note of them and will bring them up in the breakout discussions.